In 1993, Puma was dying. Not struggling. Dying. The brand that once made Olympic champions was so broke they couldn't even afford to sponsor local soccer teams. Fast forward 30 years, and they're worth over $8 billion. What happened in between is one of the most insane comebacks in business history. Look, we all know Nike, we all know Adidas. But Puma, most people today see it as that cool streetwear brand that Rihanna wore, or the logo on fancy racing shoes. But here's what nobody tells you. Puma wasn't always the underdog. There was a time when this company was ahead of everyone else. Then it crashed so hard that experts literally wrote obituaries for the brand. They said it was over, done, finished. But Puma didn't just survive. It came back with a strategy so bold that it changed the entire sports industry. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a company on life support transformed into a cultural powerhouse that makes billions today. And trust me, the story involves family betrayal, a genius move with hip-hop, and one decision that Nike is probably still mad about. Let me take you back to where this whole thing started. Germany, 1948. World War II just ended. The country is in ruins. Cities are destroyed. Families are broken. People are trying to rebuild their lives from nothing. And in a small town called Herzogenaurach, population maybe 8,000 people, two brothers are about to create something that will change sports forever. But here's the twist. These two brothers hate each other so much that their rivalry will literally split an entire town in half for decades. Rudolf and Adolf Dassler. Yeah, Adolf. He went by Adi for obvious reasons after the war. These two brothers started making shoes together in their mother's laundry room back in the 1920s. Picture this. Post-World War I Germany. The economy is destroyed. Money is worthless. But these two brothers have a vision. They believe they can make the best athletic shoes in the world. So they start the Dassler Brothers Shoe Factory. And you know what? They were actually really good at it. They weren't just good at making shoes. They understood athletes. They understood what runners needed, what football players needed, what track stars needed. They talked to athletes. They watched them train. They made shoes that solved real problems. By the early 1930s, German athletes were wearing Dassler shoes and winning medals. The brothers were building something special. Then came 1936, the Olympics in Berlin. This is the Olympics that Hitler used for propaganda. The Olympics where the world was watching Germany. And Jesse Owens, a black American athlete, shows up and destroys the Nazi narrative of racial superiority. He wins 4 gold medals. And guess what he's wearing? Shoes made by Adolf Dassler. The Dassler brothers just equipped the man who embarrassed Hitler on Germany's home turf. Their shoes were on the feet of an Olympic legend. After that, orders poured in. Athletes from around the world wanted Dassler shoes. The brothers were on top. They were the premium sports shoe company. But underneath the success, something was rotting. The relationship between Rudolf and Adolf was falling apart. Some historians say it started during the war. There are stories about Adolf staying home to make boots for the German army, while Rudolf got drafted and sent to the front lines. Rudolf apparently felt betrayed, like his brother used connections to avoid combat while he risked his life. Other stories talk about their wives, how Rudy's wife and Adi's wife couldn't stand each other, how every family dinner turned into an argument, how small disagreements about money or business decisions turned into huge fights. Some accounts claim that during an Allied bombing, Adi and his wife were running to a bomb shelter where Rudy and his family already were. Adi allegedly said, "The dirty bastards are back again," meaning the Allied bombers. But Rudy thought Adi was talking about him and his family. True or not, the story shows how toxic things had become. There's also the murky question of Nazi party involvement. Both brothers had dealings with the Nazi party because you basically had to, if you wanted to run a business in Germany at that time. But there are accusations that each brother tried to paint the other as more involved with the Nazis to gain advantage after the war. It got nasty. Really nasty. By 1947, it was over. The brothers couldn't work together anymore. They couldn't even be in the same room. So they did the only thing they could. They divided everything. The factory, the equipment, the designs. Even the employees had to choose sides. The Dassler Brothers Shoe Factory was finished. From its ashes came 2 new companies. Adolf Dassler founded Adidas in 1949. The name came from his nickname, Adi, and the first three letters of his last name, Dassler. Adidas. He set up his factory on one side of the Aurach River that ran through Herzogenaurach. Rudolf founded his company the same year. He first called it Ruda, combining Ru from Rudolf and Da from Dazzler. But that name didn't sound good, so he changed it. He wanted something strong, something fast, something powerful. He landed on PUMA, and he set up his factory on the opposite side of the river from his brother. What happened next sounds like something from a movie, but it's all true. The town of Herzogenaurach became divided. People chose sides like it was a civil war. If you worked for Adidas, you didn't associate with PUMA people. Bars became either Adidas bars or PUMA bars. Bakeries had Adidas customers or PUMA customers. Kids from Adidas families didn't play with kids from PUMA families. It sounds insane, but this lasted for decades. Decades. The town had an invisible line down the middle, and everyone knew which side they were on. The brothers themselves never spoke again. Not at family weddings, not at funerals, nothing. They lived in the same small town and actively avoided each other until they died. Rudolf died in 1974. Adolf died just 1 year later in 1975. They're buried in the same cemetery, but even in death, they're separated. Their graves are at opposite ends of the graveyard, as far apart as possible. The rivalry lasted beyond the grave. But let's talk about PUMA in those early years after the split. Rudolf wasn't just bitter. He was driven. He wanted to prove he could beat his brother. And in the beginning, PUMA was actually doing amazing. Rudy understood marketing in a way that was ahead of his time. He understood that getting the right athletes in your shoes was everything, so he went after the best. In 1958, PUMA pulled off what might be the world's first modern athlete endorsement deal. The World Cup was happening in Sweden. Brazil had this young player named Pelé. He was only 17 years old, but people said he was going to be special. Rudy somehow convinced Pelé to wear PUMA boots, and then Pelé went out and scored 6 goals in the tournament. Brazil won the World Cup, and millions of people around the world saw Pelé, the new king of football, wearing PUMA. That one move changed everything for PUMA. Suddenly, every kid who played football wanted PUMA boots. Every club team wanted PUMA deals. The brand exploded. Throughout the 1960s and into the 1970s, PUMA was everywhere. They sponsored the fastest runners. They sponsored championship football teams. They were at every Olympics. They were innovating constantly. In 1968, they created the first athletic shoes with Velcro instead of laces. In 1970, they made the lightest, fastest running spikes in the world. Athletes were setting records in PUMA shoes. PUMA also got into football boots in a big way. They sponsored some of the greatest players of that era. They had Eusebio, the Portuguese legend. They had Johan Cruyff for a while before he went to Adidas. They were signing top athletes and winning championships. The company was growing fast. By the mid-1970s, PUMA was one of the top 3 sports brands in the world alongside Adidas, and a smaller American company called Nike that most people hadn't heard of yet. But then things started shifting. The sports industry was changing in ways that PUMA didn't see coming. Up until the late 1970s, sports marketing was pretty straightforward. You made good equipment, you sponsored some athletes, you put your logo on uniforms. That was it. But then Nike came along and flipped everything upside down. Nike was started by a track coach named Bill Bowerman and a runner named Phil Knight in the 1960s. They started small, importing running shoes from Japan and selling them at track meets. But by the late 1970s and early 1980s, they had figured something out that changed everything. They realized that sports weren't just about performance anymore. Sports were becoming entertainment. They were becoming part of popular culture. And if you could connect your brand to culture, not just athletics, you could sell way more products. Nike started making advertisements that looked like short films. They started creating shoes that were about more than just running or playing basketball. They were creating sneakers as fashion statements. They were marketing a lifestyle, not just equipment. And it was working. Their sales were going through the roof. Then came 1984. Nike was looking for a basketball player to build their basketball shoe line around. They were considering a few players, but they really wanted this rookie named Michael Jordan. Jordan wasn't sure. He actually wanted to sign with Adidas because that's what all the top players wore. But Adidas didn't offer him much. They didn't think he was worth a big investment. Nike, on the other hand, bet everything on him. They offered him $500,000 a year, which was insane money for an endorsement at that time. More importantly, they gave him his own shoe line, the Air Jordan. And then Nike did something brilliant with the marketing. The NBA banned the first Air Jordan shoe because it didn't match uniform regulations. Nike saw this as an opportunity. They made commercials about the banned shoe. They positioned Jordan as a rebel. They created hype and controversy. When the shoes finally came out, people lined up around the block to buy them. The Air Jordan became more than a shoe. It became a cultural phenomenon. Kids who never played basketball wanted Air Jordans. Parents were buying them for their kids as status symbols. Sneakerhead culture was born. Meanwhile, where was PUMA? Still operating like it was 1970. They were focused on making technically great shoes for athletes. They thought if they had the best performance products, people would buy them. They didn't understand that the market had shifted. Performance mattered, sure, but now style mattered just as much. Culture mattered. Story mattered. Brand identity mattered. Through the mid-1980s, PUMA started losing ground. Nike was exploding in America. Adidas was dominating in Europe and international football. And PUMA? They were stuck in the middle, not quite keeping up with either one. Their athlete sponsorships were losing impact. Their designs were looking dated. Young people weren't excited about PUMA anymore. Then the 1990s came, and everything got worse. Way worse. The Soviet Union had just collapsed. The global economy was changing. Competition in the sports industry was getting brutal, and PUMA was bleeding money. By 1993, the situation was dire. PUMA was reporting massive financial losses. We're talking tens of millions of dollars in the red. Their revenue was dropping year after year. They were losing shelf space in stores. Retailers didn't want to carry PUMA products because they weren't selling. The brand had become irrelevant. When kids went to buy sneakers, they asked for Nike or Adidas. Nobody was asking for PUMA. The company had to start laying off workers. Hundreds, then thousands of employees lost their jobs. Factories were shutting down. PUMA had manufacturing facilities in several countries, and they were closing them one by one because they couldn't afford to keep them running. Suppliers were demanding payment upfront because they were worried PUMA would go bankrupt and they wouldn't get paid at all. Inside the company, morale was destroyed. Employees who had worked for PUMA their entire careers were watching the brand die. Management was changing constantly. New leaders would come in, try a different strategy for a year or two. It wouldn't work, and they'd leave. There was no clear vision, no sense of direction, just a slow, painful decline. The media started writing obituaries for the brand. Business magazines published articles with headlines like "The Death of PUMA" and "Can PUMA Survive?" Industry analysts were openly speculating about whether Nike or Adidas would buy PUMA's assets after the company folded. Some thought PUMA would be gone within 5 years. The brand that Rudolf Dassler built from nothing, the brand that sponsored Pelé and Olympic champions, was dying. And here's what made it even more painful. Adidas, the company founded by Rudy's brother, was doing fine. They were profitable. They were growing. The rivalry that had defined both companies since 1948 looked like it was finally over, with Adidas as the clear winner. Rudolf Dassler had died 20 years earlier, but his company was about to die with him. But then something happened that changed everything. In 1993, a Swedish industrial holding company called Preventus bought a controlling stake in PUMA. Preventus was known for buying struggling companies and turning them around. They looked at PUMA and saw potential. More importantly, they brought in someone to run the company who nobody expected. A guy named Jochen Zeitz. Jochen Zeitz was 30 years old. Let me say that again. 30 years old. This wasn't some experienced retail executive with decades in the industry. This wasn't a sports marketing legend with a proven track record. This was a guy who had worked for PUMA for only 2 years in strategic planning. He was so young that when he became CEO, he made history as the youngest CEO of a publicly traded company in Germany. People thought Preventus had lost their minds. You don't hand a dying company to a 30-year-old and expect miracles. But Zeitz wasn't your typical corporate executive. He had studied business in Germany and the United States. He had worked at Colgate-Palmolive before joining PUMA. And most importantly, he saw things differently than the old guard at PUMA. He wasn't emotionally attached to how things used to be. He didn't care about tradition or legacy. He cared about one thing: survival. And he knew that survival meant changing everything. The first thing Zeitz did was brutal, but necessary. He looked at all of PUMA's products and asked one simple question: is this making money? And for most products, the answer was no. So he cut them. He slashed PUMA's product range by 70% in the first few years. 70%. If you walked into a PUMA store in 1992, you might see 3,000 different products. By 1995, that was down to about 900. Zeitz got rid of anything that wasn't working. Running shoes that nobody bought? Gone. Training gear that sat on shelves? Gone. Random sports equipment that diluted the brand? All gone. He also closed factories and cut costs everywhere he could. This wasn't fun. People lost jobs. Communities that depended on PUMA factories were hurt. But Zeitz knew that if he didn't make these cuts, the entire company would collapse, and everyone would lose their jobs anyway. It was like amputating an arm to save the body. Painful but necessary, but cutting costs was only part of the plan. The real genius of what Zeitz did was in how he repositioned the brand. He spent months studying the market, looking at competitors, trying to understand what had gone wrong and how to fix it. And he came to a conclusion that shocked everyone in the sports industry. Zeitz realized that PUMA could not compete directly with Nike and Adidas. Not anymore. Those companies were too big, too rich, too established. Nike was spending hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing. They had Michael Jordan, Bo Jackson, and soon they'd have Tiger Woods and a dozen other superstars. Adidas was dominant in football with sponsorships of major clubs and national teams. They had the FIFA World Cup locked up. If PUMA tried to go head-to-head with them in traditional sports marketing, they would lose every time. They'd spend money they didn't have chasing athletes they couldn't afford to compete for shoes that would just get lost in the noise. So Zeitz made a decision that people thought was crazy. He decided that PUMA would stop trying to be a pure sports performance brand. Instead, they would become a sports lifestyle brand. They would position PUMA at the intersection of sports, fashion, and culture. They would make products that worked for athletes, but were designed for everyone. They would target people who cared about style as much as performance. The problem was convincing people inside PUMA. The company had been founded by an athlete. It had a history of making shoes for Olympic champions. A lot of the old employees felt like Zeitz was betraying what PUMA stood for. They thought he was turning their back on sports. There were arguments. There were people who quit or got fired because they didn't agree with the new direction. But Zeitz held firm. He knew that respecting the past was admirable, but living in the past would kill the company. One of the first moves he made in this new direction was hiring different kinds of designers. Traditionally, PUMA designers came from sports backgrounds. They knew how to make a good running shoe or a durable football boot. But Zeitz started hiring people from fashion, people who had worked for clothing brands, people who understood trends and style. He told them, "Make shoes and clothes that people want to wear to a party, not just a gym." This changed everything about how PUMA products looked. The designs got bolder, the colors got more interesting, the shapes got more fashionable. These weren't just functional athletic shoes anymore. These were statement pieces. You could wear them with jeans. You could wear them to a club. They looked cool. But the really big move came in the late 1990s when Zeitz started looking at music culture, especially hip-hop. Now, hip-hop had been growing since the 1980s, but by the late 1990s, it was exploding into the mainstream. Rappers were becoming some of the most influential people in popular culture. Kids weren't just listening to hip-hop, they were dressing like rappers, they were talking like rappers. Hip-hop was defining what was cool. And Zeitz noticed something interesting. Nike and Adidas were still focused almost entirely on athletes. Yes, some rappers wore their shoes, but the companies weren't actively courting hip-hop culture. They saw it as secondary to sports. Zeitz saw it differently. He thought hip-hop artists were the new cultural athletes. They might not play basketball or run track, but they influenced millions of people. They set trends. They made things cool. So Puma started reaching out to hip-hop artists. They started sponsoring rappers and getting their shoes into music videos. They started collaborating with artists on designs. This was groundbreaking. Yes, Run DMC had their famous song about Adidas in the 1980s, but that was more organic. Puma was actively building relationships with hip-hop as a marketing strategy. They were one of the first major sports brands to really embrace hip-hop as equal to traditional sports. And it worked. Slowly at first, but it worked. Kids in New York, LA, Atlanta, Chicago started wearing Puma again. Not because their favorite athlete wore them, but because their favorite rapper wore them. Puma became cool in the underground scene. It became authentic to street culture, and that authenticity spread. But Zeitz wasn't satisfied with just hip-hop. He wanted to push even further into fashion. So in 1998, he made a move that shocked the entire industry. He partnered with Jill Sander, one of the most respected high-fashion designers in the world, to create a luxury line of Puma products. Let me explain how crazy this was. Jill Sander was known for minimalist, sophisticated, expensive fashion. Her clothes were sold in high-end boutiques and department stores. She dressed wealthy, fashion-conscious people. She had nothing to do with sports. And Zeitz asked her to design Puma products, not just put her name on them, actually design them. The collection that came out of this partnership was unlike anything a sports brand had done. These were high-quality, beautifully designed pieces that blurred the line between sportswear and high fashion. They were expensive. A Puma by Jill Sander shoe might cost 3 or 4 times what a regular Puma shoe cost. But that was the point. Zeitz wanted to elevate the brand. He wanted fashion magazines writing about Puma. He wanted high-end stores carrying Puma. He wanted to change the perception of what Puma was. And it worked. Vogue wrote about Puma. GQ wrote about Puma. High-end stores like Barney's in New York started carrying Puma products. Celebrities who would never have worn a sports brand before were suddenly wearing Puma. The brand was getting cool in a completely different way than Nike or Adidas. Of course, not everyone loved this. Some sports purists thought Zeitz had gone too far. They said he was abandoning performance for fashion. They said real athletes wouldn't wear Puma anymore. But Zeitz didn't care. He knew that the performance market was saturated. Every brand made good running shoes now. Every brand made good football boots. But nobody was making sports-inspired fashion that was actually fashionable. That was Puma's opportunity. Through the early 2000s, Puma kept pushing this strategy. They partnered with more designers. Alexander McQueen, the legendary British designer, created a line for Puma. Yasuhiro Mihara, a Japanese designer known for innovative footwear, collaborated with them. Hussein Chalayan, another high-fashion name, worked with Puma. Each of these partnerships brought new attention to the brand. Each one reinforced that Puma was different from other sports brands. But Zeitz also made sure Puma didn't completely abandon sports. They still sponsored athletes. They still made performance products. But they chose their athletes differently. Instead of going after the biggest, most expensive stars, they went after young, interesting athletes who fit the brand's culture. They sponsored athletes who had style, athletes who were cool beyond just their sport. This way, they could still be credible in sports without spending money they couldn't afford. By the mid-2000s, Puma's turnaround was becoming obvious. Their revenue was growing again. They were profitable for the first time in years. The stock price was going up. Fashion and sports media were writing positive stories about the brand. Puma was back. Not as big as Nike or Adidas, but back and growing. Then in 2007, Puma made a move that would define the next decade of the brand. They signed a partnership with Rihanna. Now in 2007, Rihanna was famous. She had hits like Umbrella and Don't Stop the Music. But she wasn't yet the global superstar and fashion icon she would become. Puma saw her potential early. They saw that she had incredible style. They saw that she influenced trends. They saw that young people, especially young women, wanted to be like her. At first, it was a standard endorsement deal. Rihanna appeared in Puma ads. She wore Puma products. But then in 2014, Puma made a much bolder move. They made Rihanna the creative director of their women's line. Not just a spokesperson, not just a celebrity face, an actual creative director with real control over design. This was huge. Celebrity endorsements were common, But giving a celebrity this much power over a product line was rare. PUMA was betting that Rihanna understood what women wanted better than traditional designers did. And they were right. In 2015, Rihanna launched the PUMA Fenty line. Fenty was Rihanna's last name, and this line was her vision. The first product was the Fenty Creeper, a thick-soled sneaker that looked unlike anything else on the market. It was bold, it was fashion-forward, it was different. When the Fenty Creeper dropped, it sold out in hours, not days. Hours. The demand was insane. People were camping outside stores. The shoes were being resold online for double or triple the retail price. Celebrities like Kylie Jenner and Gigi Hadid were wearing them. Fashion critics were praising them. And in 2016, the Fenty Creeper won Shoe of the Year from Footwear News, one of the biggest awards in the footwear industry. Rihanna continued releasing Fenty designs, the Fenty Slides, the Fenty Trainers. Each release was an event. Each one sold out quickly, and the impact on PUMA was massive. In the quarters after the Fenty line launched, PUMA's sales increased by over 30% in some regions. The stock price jumped. The brand was suddenly one of the hottest in fashion and streetwear. What made the Rihanna partnership so successful wasn't just her fame, it was her credibility. She actually cared about design. She was involved in every detail. She brought ideas that PUMA's internal designers hadn't thought of, and consumers could tell. These weren't just products with a celebrity's name slapped on them. These were genuine collaborations, where Rihanna's creative vision was clear. The Fenty partnership also helped PUMA reach a demographic they had struggled with: young women. Sports brands had traditionally focused on men. Women's products were often just smaller versions of men's products in different colors. But Rihanna designed for women from the start. She understood what young women wanted in athletic-inspired fashion. She made products that were sexy, stylish, and functional, and young women responded by buying everything she designed. Of course, PUMA didn't rely only on Rihanna. They kept building other partnerships. In 2016, they signed Selena Gomez as a brand ambassador. Selena had a massive following, especially among younger audiences. They partnered with Kylie Jenner for a velour tracksuit collection that sold out immediately. They worked with The Weeknd, one of the biggest artists in music. Each of these partnerships brought new attention and new customers. PUMA also got smart about sports sponsorships in a way that fit their brand. They couldn't afford to sponsor the Premier League or the NBA like Nike and Adidas did, but they found opportunities others overlooked. They became a major sponsor in Formula One racing, partnering with teams like Ferrari and Mercedes. This brought PUMA into the world of luxury motorsports, which fit perfectly with their lifestyle positioning. F1 fans tend to be wealthier and more fashion-conscious than fans of some other sports. It was a perfect match. In football, PUMA couldn't sponsor the biggest clubs like Real Madrid or Manchester United. Those deals cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But they sponsored interesting, exciting clubs like Arsenal, Borussia Dortmund, and AC Milan. They also went after individual players who fit their brand. Neymar, one of the most stylish and marketable footballers in the world, signed with PUMA in 2020 in a deal reportedly worth millions per year. Luis Suarez, Sergio Aguero, Antoine Griezmann. PUMA built a roster of exciting players without spending Nike or Adidas money. They also jumped into basketball in a smart way. Instead of throwing money at established NBA superstars, they signed young players like LaMelo Ball and RJ Barrett. These were players on the rise, players who had style and personality, players who were big on social media. They cost less than superstars, but brought energy and excitement to the brand. By 2015, PUMA's revenue had grown to over $3 billion, up from barely $1 billion in the late 1990s. By 2018, it was over $4 billion. By 2020, it had crossed $5 billion. The company that was almost dead 25 years earlier was now one of the fastest-growing sports brands in the world. The stock price had increased by over 400% since 2012. Analysts who once predicted PUMA's death were now calling it one of the greatest corporate turnarounds ever. But it wasn't just about the numbers, it was about relevance. In the 1990s, PUMA was forgotten. Nobody talked about PUMA. Nobody cared about PUMA. By the 2010s, PUMA was part of the cultural conversation. When celebrities posted on Instagram, They were often wearing PUMA. When fashion shows happened during Fashion Week, PUMA was showing collections. When music festivals happened, PUMA was sponsoring them and creating festival-exclusive merchandise. The brand was everywhere in culture. Zeitz stepped down as CEO in 2013 after 20 years, but his strategy continued. The new leadership team understood what he had built and kept pushing it forward. They invested heavily in digital marketing and social media, understanding that young consumers lived online. They created Instagram-worthy products and campaigns. They partnered with influencers before influencer marketing was a mainstream thing. They also started investing in sustainability, which was becoming increasingly important to young consumers. PUMA launched initiatives to use more recycled materials in their products. They committed to reducing carbon emissions in their supply chain. They created programs to recycle old shoes. This wasn't just good for the environment, it was good for the brand image. Young consumers, especially Gen Z, care about companies that care about the planet. PUMA positioned themselves as a leader in sustainable sportswear. Of course, it hasn't all been perfect. In 2018, Rihanna's Fenty partnership ended. There were reports of disagreements about creative direction and business terms. When the partnership ended, some analysts worried that PUMA would lose momentum. And there was some impact. But PUMA had diversified enough that they weren't dependent on one celebrity. They kept moving forward with other partnerships and initiatives. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 hit PUMA hard like every retail company. Stores closed, production stopped, supply chains broke down, sports events were canceled, which meant less visibility for their sponsored athletes and teams. But PUMA adapted. They focused on direct-to-consumer sales through their website. They improved their online shopping experience. They created digital marketing campaigns. And when the world opened back up, they bounced back quickly. Today, in 2025, PUMA is worth over $8 billion. They employ over 16,000 people worldwide. They sell products in more than 120 countries. Their market share has grown to around 15% in certain categories like sports-style footwear. They're still the #3 sports brand globally behind Nike and Adidas, but they're profitable, growing, and incredibly influential. Let me give you some perspective on how massive this comeback is. In 1993, PUMA was losing money. They had maybe 7% market share in athletic footwear. Employees were scared they'd lose their jobs. Retailers were dropping the brand. The future looked bleak. Fast forward 30 years, and they're worth $8 billion. $8 billion. That's not just survival. That's thriving. That's one of the greatest business comebacks in modern history. So what are the real lessons here? What did PUMA do that other struggling brands can learn from? First lesson: accept reality. When you're struggling, denial makes things worse. Zeitz could have tried to keep doing what PUMA had always done and hoped things would get better. He could have convinced himself that they just needed better products or better ads. But he didn't. He looked at the situation honestly and said, "We can't win playing this game." That brutal honesty allowed him to create a new strategy. Most leaders can't do this. Most leaders cling to the past because it's comfortable. But comfort kills struggling companies. Second lesson: find white space. When everyone is competing for the same customers with the same strategies, it's a race to the bottom. Nike and Adidas were spending billions on athlete endorsements and traditional sports marketing. If PUMA tried to compete dollar for dollar in that game, they'd lose. So Zeitz found white space. He found the gap between sports and fashion that nobody else was filling. He went after cultural influencers instead of athletes. He created a new category where competition was lower. This is business genius. Don't compete where everyone else is competing. Create a new space where you can win. Third lesson: know your customer. PUMA realized that young people in the 2000s didn't live in segments anymore. They didn't have gym clothes, and regular clothes, and going out clothes. They wanted clothes that worked everywhere. They wanted to go from yoga to brunch to shopping without changing. They wanted performance fabrics with fashion designs. PUMA gave them that. They understood their customer better than bigger brands did because they had to. They couldn't afford to waste money on products nobody wanted. Fourth lesson: be patient. This turnaround took years, almost a decade before things really started clicking. In today's world, Everyone wants instant results. Companies fire CEOs after 2 years if the stock price doesn't jump. But real transformation takes time. Zeitz had the patience and the backing to see his strategy through. He knew that rebuilding a brand couldn't happen overnight. He stuck with his vision even when people doubted it. Fifth lesson: take calculated risks. Every major move PUMA made was risky. Partnering with high-fashion designers when you're a sports brand? Risky. Focusing on hip-hop when that wasn't mainstream marketing? Risky. Making Rihanna a creative director with real power? Risky. But these weren't reckless risks. They were calculated. Zeitz did research. He understood trends. He picked partners carefully. He knew that playing it safe would mean slow death. The only way to come back was to take risks, but he took smart risks based on insight, not desperation. Sixth lesson: stay authentic. PUMA never tried to be Nike. They never tried to be Adidas. They could have copied what successful brands were doing, but instead, they figured out what made PUMA unique and leaned into it. They embraced being the alternative. They embraced being the brand for people who want something different. That authenticity resonated. Consumers can tell when a brand is genuine versus when it's just following trends. Seventh lesson: quality still matters. Through all the marketing and partnerships and cultural positioning, PUMA never forgot to make good products. Their shoes are comfortable. Their clothes are well made. Their performance gear actually performs. You can have the best marketing in the world, but if your product sucks, people won't come back. PUMA balanced style with substance. And finally, eighth lesson: evolve constantly. PUMA didn't execute the turnaround plan and then stop. They kept evolving. They moved into new markets. They tried new partnerships. They invested in sustainability. They improved their digital presence. The brand today is different from the brand in 2005, which was different from the brand in 1995. Constant evolution is the only way to stay relevant. So that's the complete story of PUMA's comeback. From Olympic glory in the 1960s to near bankruptcy in the 1990s to cultural powerhouse today, it's a story about recognizing when the world has changed. It's about having the courage to reinvent yourself when everyone says you're crazy. It's about understanding that success isn't always about being the biggest. Sometimes it's about finding your lane and dominating it. The next time you see someone wearing PUMA, remember what that logo represents. It's not just a cat leaping forward. It's proof that comebacks are possible. It's proof that even when experts declare you dead, you can come back stronger if you're willing to change. It's proof that innovation isn't just about products. Sometimes the real innovation is how you position your brand in culture. PUMA's story is still being written. They're expanding in Asia. They're investing in new technologies. They're creating more sustainable products. They're partnering with the next generation of cultural icons. Who knows what they'll do next? But if history tells us anything, they won't play it safe. They'll keep pushing boundaries. They'll keep taking risks, because that's what brought them back from the dead, and that's what will keep them alive. The next video reveals the billion-dollar mistake that still haunts Nike. Don't miss it.